Elio is one movie where everybody seemed more interested in the drama surrounding its production rather than anything to do with the final product. Though given that the first trailer presented a very different film than the one that was ultimately released, with it being confirmed that the original director had a very different vision for the movie before he left the project, it's very easy to see why so many would be interested in what exactly happened. Because on top of that, many who've worked on the film have gone on to say that the original story by Adrian Molina was much better than the final product. And today, I'd like to take a look at what exactly these employees had to say on Elio and whether or not it's a fair assessment of the film. Though I may as well warn you right now, this is going to be one of my more opinion-based videos. I'll try to stick to the facts, but you can expect me to inject my personal thoughts in here more often than usual. And there will also be major spoilers for Elio ahead, so in case you haven't gotten to see it yet and don't want it ruined, you should really consider coming back to this video after you have seen it. Okay, so to get right into it, many Pixar employees who had to work on Elio have made it very well known that they weren't impressed with the final product, with one of them even calling it, quote, a film about nothing, and made it clear that they would have much rather brought Adrian Molina's vision to life. Now, as I say in pretty much every video, everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and I don't begrudge anybody who expresses theirs. And that being said, is Elio a perfect movie? No. I even conceded in my review of the film, which you can find a link in the description to, that even though I liked it on the whole, it had a few problems. It does feel a little overly safe, drags out certain plot threads for too long while not focusing enough on others, and doesn't use certain concepts it introduces to its fullest advantage. But at the same time, does that really mean it's a movie about nothing? No, absolutely not. Because first of all, I don't doubt that Adrian Molina's version would have probably been a better movie, if only because it had a clearer vision of what it wanted to be and knew exactly what it intended to get across. But that being said, that doesn't mean that the final product is worthless. Because as I even went on at length about in the aforementioned video, Elio is ultimately a movie that shows children in a way that they can understand that their parents or parental figures do love them. And as I repeatedly stressed in that video, I do think that's a very important lesson to teach kids. Because let's face it, some parents really are just awful and don't care about their children, and that's the end of it. But thankfully they are the exception, not the rule. Because even if parents are only human, and some of them don't do the best job at parenting, ultimately most do love their children and only want what's best for them. But as anybody who knows anything about kids undoubtedly knows, one of their biggest fears is that their parents don't love them or even resent them for holding them back. And not only does Elio tackle these fears head on, but addresses them so that the children watching will be assured that this is most definitely not the case. Because as I just noted, while some parents are just plain horrible, most love their children and would gladly do anything for them. It's just that since they're only human, and raising kids naturally comes with a lot of stress, it's a foregone conclusion that the road is pretty bumpy. And because children have very active imaginations and always go to extremes, it's a very common fear of theirs that any disharmony means that their parents don't care about them or even secretly hate them. And this is not only shared by Elio in the film, but he has even more reason to believe it because he lost his parents and has to be raised by a single aunt. And since she has a very demanding job and no experience at parenting, as well as Elio being very aware of the fact that she gave up her more ambitious dreams to look after him, he believes that she would be happier without him holding her back, and that she must secretly hate him for getting in the way of her life. And as I keep stressing, those are fears and even guilt that many children have to deal with, and thus they can relate to Elio very well. But where the genius of this movie comes in is how it goes about disproving these fears. Because first of all, as Glorden points out, if Olga was willing to put her dreams on hold and upend her whole life in order to take care of him, that was her choice and motivated by how much she cared for him. Not that she views him as a burden that she feels responsible for taking in. In other words, Olga could have put her dreams first and let Elio be put into foster care, but she instead chose to take him in at a sacrifice to herself because she simply loves him enough that she sees those things as worth giving up for him, that she doesn't view him as a burden imposed upon her, but as a gift that she would gladly give up some of her dreams for. And this is only hammered home when he finally meets up with her again, and she tells him point blank, "All I want is you," which is exactly how most parents actually feel about their children, no matter what they might say or do in a moment of stress or anger. And again, what makes it even more impressive is how well it conveys all of this so that children will understand it. Because as a kid, they naturally can't understand what it's like to be a parent. But the way the narrative presents things makes it crystal clear that the measure of a parent's love is what they're willing to give up for their children, and that they'll never resent them or see them as a burden for having to do it. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a very good message to send to kids, and should probably even be told to them more often. Though what also helps is that Olga was honestly the perfect character to convey this moral through. Seriously, this woman clearly had some pretty big ambitions in life, and yet when her brother and wife end up dead, she doesn't hesitate to take in her troubled nephew, putting her olden dreams on hold to do so, tries to do everything she can to reach him even when he proves very resistant, all the while having to work a very stressful job, and never once takes any of this emotional anguish out on him. Frankly, even if she isn't actually his mother, Olga honestly deserves a Parent of the Year award because she's the kind of guardian every child deserves, especially for how patient she is with him. Because even if Elio proves himself to be a handful, she cares for him enough to understand that it's fueled by his feeling lost from the death of his parents, and thus doesn't even blame him for acting out. Even if Elio doesn't realize it, she totally understands how he thinks. And that's another thing about her. The fact that she doesn't resort to extreme discipline or tough love to get through to him. Because even if it would lower her stress load, it would only make things worse for him. And again, she loves him enough to put his emotional needs first, no matter how difficult that makes it for her. And like I pointed out in my review, the fact that she doesn't hesitate to pull him out of camp, even if it would have been easier for her to keep him there after he gets hurt, but actually tells off the counselors for letting it happen, rather than just assume Elio picked a fight and blaming him, is only more proof of that. And honestly, I will say that them changing her to his aunt was a really great choice, because it helps get all of this across even more effectively, since she didn't even choose to have Elio, yet loves him unconditionally like a parent anyway, which drives all of this home even further. But then there's the dynamic between Glorden and Gringon, which is a lot more complicated. Because obviously there are a lot of parents like Gringon out there that are so determined to turn their children into what they want, or make it clear to them that they view them as a disappointment even when they've done nothing wrong, that don't care about them as individuals nearly as much as Gringon turns out to. But here's the thing, even if most children at some point in their life fear that their parents don't love them, they know the difference between them simply being annoyed and abuse. And the fact that Glorden always seems happy to see his father, and even agrees to be kidnapped by Elio because it'll get his attention, clearly shows that even if Gringon doesn't mince words when it comes to his exasperation with Glorden, he's never done anything to physically or emotionally harm his son. Because I only have a very amateur understanding of psychology, but how a child behaves around their parent is a dead giveaway of how good a parent they are. And the happier they are around them, the better a parent they are. Now obviously this isn't a one-size-fits-all scenario, but for the purposes of this video, Elio, that's all one needs to know. And again, the fact that Gordon is always happy to see his father and never once exhibits any fear towards him makes it clear that despite being a proud warrior, he does do right by his son. And this is important because there are a lot of parents like that as well. They love their children more than anything, and when push comes to shove would do anything for them, but just don't have the best ways of showing it. But Gordon clearly knows that his father cares about him to an extent, as his comment on Olga shows that he understands that sacrifice comes from a place of love, and Gringon is willing to give up a lot for the sake of his son, and more so than most would expect at that, probably up to and including Gordon himself. Basically, their dynamic is meant to show that even if your parent is rather tough, or they don't always see eye to eye with you, they still do love you if they're willing to do for you what they would never do for anybody else. And again, the fact that Gringon repeatedly does that for Gordon tells children that parents may not always be the ideal figure, but they'll still always be there for you when you need them. Because simply put, if a child identifies with Gordon, then they do have a parent that's worth seeing the value in. Because Gringon may not be the perfect parent, but he's ultimately willing to do what's best for his son without hesitation, and in the end accepts him unconditionally despite being the opposite of what he wanted him to be. Again, he's not perfect, but he is everything a parent should still be. So like I said before, Elio is clearly not a film about nothing, because it has some pretty valuable lessons to teach children that more movies should honestly go over. Because again, the fear that their parents don't love them is extremely common among young kids, no matter how irrational it is most of the time. So the fact that the movie not only addresses it, but goes about it in a way that they can understand and be assured that that isn't the case makes it a film worth seeing. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that such a lesson is worthless. I don't think that a movie that tells children that their parents love them is nothing. As I've repeatedly said, I honestly think more kids' movies should address such topics, even if they probably couldn't do it half as well as Elio did. Because this isn't like that stupid Lilo and Stitch remake. And yes, I know I already drew that same comparison in my review on Elio, but I'm doing it again here. Because I've made it no secret that I hate the Disney live-action remakes. And I even explained a few of the reasons why in another video, which you can also find a link in the description to. But the Lilo and Stitch remake is a particular sore spot for me. Especially because while Elio, which I've conceded is not perfect, but would still argue is a good children's film, gets trashed by the very people who made it, this garbage Lilo and Stitch movie was actually defended by the movie's director despite the fact that it went against the core theme of the original. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again, but the moral of Lilo and Stitch is that a loving family is more important than anything else, as well as that ensuring that it's never broken up and that everybody is always there for each other. So the fact that Nani gives up Lilo and Jumba becomes the main villain of the film, which are the two things the director defended, completely undermines what it's trying to say. Now, I've already spoken my piece on the whole Nani thing, so all I'll say is, Olga is everything that Nani should have been in this film, not hesitating to give up her dreams for a family member that needed them. The fact that Lilo was taken in by a neighbor or that she has a transportation gun doesn't make anything about the fact that she legally gave up her sister okay, when the movie is supposed to be about the importance of a loving family staying together despite the odds. Because I know people do have issues with the original, but at least there the characters were written to be human. But as I pointed out in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too, for some reason audiences seem to have a very low tolerance for that sometimes, at least when it comes to heroes. I mean, sure, Nani isn't a perfect guardian to Lilo, and Lilo acts out quite a bit, but that's realistic. Nani's a teenager and way over her head, and Lilo's a 6-year-old who just lost her parents. How do you expect them to act? Frankly, the fact that she's willing to go to such lengths to keep Lilo, despite how easy it would be to let her go, is way more powerful and sends a much better message, just like with Olga and Elio. And they took that all away from her and destroyed the theme in the movie along with it. And that's not even getting into what they did to Jumba, especially because the director said that Gantu kidnapping Lilo at the climax, quote, turned the original into a conventional film. Now that's all well and good, except for the fact that the entire movie builds up Jumba as becoming the villain. So the fact that he doesn't, and instead is there for Stitch when he needs him most, only helps reinforce the family theme of the movie, because Jumba is the closest thing to a family Stitch has, and ultimately helps him despite not having any real reason to. And on top of that, it subverts the typical mad scientist cliche that it looks like Jumba will fill, as he walks back from his evil deeds and appears to regret them rather than descending further into insanity like one would expect. The point here is, everything about Jumba is not only subversive, but has a reason for being that way because it ties into the themes of the film. But by making him the villain, that turns it into a conventional movie, because that's exactly where it looks like the narrative is heading and plays into cliches. And the same goes for the alien invasion story, as the original puts a very interesting spin on it by having it turn out that the government knows about aliens and not only intentionally keeps it a secret, but actually had a pretty serious run-in with them years before, where they had to save Earth from destruction. In the live-action remake, it's just another dime a dozen First Contact movie. So if anything, the remake is the conventional film rather than the original that he was critiquing. I'm sorry, I know this really doesn't have anything to do with Elio, but it just kind of burns me up that a pretty good kids movie with an important message to send to its audience gets trashed on by the people who made it, while a worthless remake gets defended left and right by its creators when it doesn't deserve it. Especially because most of it doesn't even make sense. I mean, this guy says he didn't think it was realistic that Nani would be on her own and trying to take care of Lilo, and yet fought for Pleakley to have his unconvincing woman disguise. Does that make any sense to you? It's like, buddy, I don't know what planet you're living on, but Earth ain't it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to agree with this guy's sentiments, but the simple fact is that way too many people who don't deserve it are left on their own because people refuse to help them. It's honestly one of the saddest truths about the world. So the fact that he thinks it's unrealistic that Nani wouldn't have help is frankly absurd. Again, I love the sentiment and would like to agree with him, but the reality of it is that what she has to go through in the original movie is simply all too real. But either way, the point here is that Elio is by no means a perfect movie, but it does still have worth, and a lot more of it than most are willing to give it credit for, up to and including the people who made it. Because again, I don't think that a movie that tells children that their parents love them and don't resent them is not a film about nothing, especially when it conveys it as well as Elio did. But the fact that it gets swept under the rug and dubbed worthless, while a movie that's really about nothing and shouldn't have been made at all has a passionate defender in its director is really irritating. But on top of that, the fact that the Lilo and Stitch remake made so much money, while Elio flopped, is also pretty sobering, because it really shows where everybody's priorities are all around. In the end, I guess Elio never really stood a chance, but even if most weren't impressed by it, and it arguably could have been better, it was most certainly not about nothing, and did have something important to say, and in the end had way more value than a lot of the movies that ended up stealing its thunder. Okay, I think I've gone on about this for long enough, so now I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Do you believe that Elio really is a movie about nothing, as one of the makers of the film described it? Or do you believe that, while most definitely not perfect, it ultimately sends an important message to children about how much their parents really love them? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And like I said at the beginning, you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video that you don't want to. You can most definitely feel about Elio and anything else brought up that you want, and it is your indisputable right to feel that way. And thank you all for watching. I very appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.